Welcome to Relationships and Astrology, Series 1, which is all about compatibility. And part 1 today is about the moon. And I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin.
And I'm Armand Diaz in New York. Welcome.
Today we're going to talk about the moon because I don't know if you noticed this, Armand, but a lot of people talk about compatibility. And when they talk about compatibility, I should say, they actually refer to the sun sign rather than the moon. But I think the moon is actually even more important than the sun sign, particularly when looking at relationships with significant others.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that the moon is where we have our security needs. It is where we are looking back to the past and things that kind of hold us emotionally. And the sun is what our lives are about, but the moon is what we're feeling. And I think that the moon is very important in relationships.
Absolutely, because when we're behind closed door, when we're in the privacy really of our close relationships, then it's really what's going on for us with another person, within ourselves, first of all, with another person, is really described by our moon in our chart.
Very much so. Very, very much so. How about this quote here, Margaret? I like this one.
Yes, I really love this one. This is one of my favorite ones because it really talks about what the moon is all about, the essence of the moon.
The moon is faithful to its nature, and its power is never diminished. I love that, the end quote there. So the moon in astrology, it's often associated with the mother, mothering, nurturing, experiences of how we are comforted. It's the connection to our body. It's our emotions. Do you feel that it is the mother, Margaret?
You know, to me, it's our internal archetype of mother. It's often describes, of course, it coincides with our experience of mothering and also maybe how we are as mothers. But it's really more about that archetype of mothering within us, which of course has great impact on our relationships because there's always an element of those parental archetypes in all our relationships.
I agree. I love your last line. This is your slide here, and it's our sense of home within, which is a great way to describe the moon. And I love tell us a little bit about this slide. I love this one.
Well, you know, I love images, Armand, and I think images describe things, sometimes more immediately than words do. And I think there's something about, particularly the one of the plant, that there's something about what we plant, within us. And the two, the woman with the different faces, that our emotions, of course, change from moment to moment. So they're not something that are fixed and rigid. And also the I one is that we often, they say we see somebody's soul through their eyes, and I certainly believe we can see so much about people's emotions and who they are through the eyes.
I love these images. They're dream images, but they're images that that show that in dreams there's this emotionality. They're they're very lunar dream images.
Well, of course, we're less defended in our dream state, and so it's easier to be who we are.
That's true. And I love this quote from Galileo that you have here. It's a beautiful and delightful sight to behold the body of the moon.
Oh, I just love his work.
So let's start looking at a couple of famous couples and taking a look at their moon signs and their lunar compatibilities.
Absolutely. And the first one we have today is are the moons really of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, because of course they have been in the news recently and they are going through a separation. And really what we thought we'd look at is just how, how we would describe their moons and what their moons are about. And the first thing that struck me, Armand, of course, is that their moon is in a very different element. And that his moon, of course, is in Earth, in Capricorn, and her moon is in fire. And in astrology, of course, we have the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water, which, if anybody is listening, they're not an astrologer, one way to think of that is just the elements in nature, fire, earth, air, and water, and think of those qualities. And so when you apply them to the moon, we're talking about the emotions and how the emotions are best expressed by the person in those qualities.
Oh, entirely so. And so an earthy moon is a practicality about it. There is Capricorn is certainly very, and he has a lot of planets in Capricorn. There's a drive to Capricorn, but it's an earthy sort of drive. By contrast, that moon in Aries is always ready to go, always ready for the next thing.
Absolutely. And I also think of moon in Capricorn as being quite a private moon. In generally moon in Earth, I find, I don't know if you notice this, but you know, that people need quite a time alone often to process their emotions. They need privacy, they need boundaries, particularly a moon in Capricorn. Whereas moon in Aries, of course, is so action oriented. It's kind of a very playful moon. So it really loves the next adventure. I notice this particularly in charts of children, and children are great to look at their moon sign because they really live out their moon so fully. That if a child with moon in Aries is distressed, one way of comforting them is to kind of remind them of the next adventure ahead, maybe to say, oh, remember you've got a party with your friends this weekend or whatever. Whereas a child with moon in Capricorn really needs a little bit of quiet time, maybe a room on their own where they can just be with their comforting things around them, their toys and so on.
Also, too, that's a very good point, and that is a great way to comfort Moon in Aries, Moon in Capricorn. Well, Moon in Capricorn, the default nurturing thing is let me do something. Moon in Capricorn will work as a comfort type of thing, which is not always the easiest thing for everyone to understand. Moon in Aries likes to get, when I think of comfort, I think about being a little bit more, at home, sort of in my usual comfort zone. Moon in Aries likes to get out. That gets comforting to go on an adventure. It's comforting to get moving, to try something new, to do something different. And so Moon in Capricorn, Moon in Aries are definitely a bit of a challenge.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we're talking about compatibility, what I usually look at to see if if the couple have the moon in the same element, even if it's not the same sign at all. But what I find is that if there's, if the element is compatible, similar element, I should say, compatible element. So usually moon in earth and water are a little bit more compatible than a moon in earth and fire. So all it means really is that there needs to be an adjustment so that the other person who has a different moon ideally needs to really understand their partner's moon. And that's where astrology is so useful because I don't know with you, Armand, but I notice when couples come to me that it can be very comforting to know that what their partner's moon is all about, because then they can make adjustments, then they understand, because we all nurture somebody in the way usually our own moon is, likes to be nurtured, rather than actually step into the other person's moon, because we don't know that the other person's moon is different. And once we do, we can make that adjustment.
Oh, that's very true. And it's a very good point to have that awareness of what the other person's lunar needs are is key. Also, too, I want to say that, everything else in the chart, and this is a very interesting chart dynamic, can show the attraction. It can show everything else. But the moon has a lot to do with how you're going to actually get together on a daily basis. It has a lot to do with how you're living together, how you're interacting on a very emotional, on a very intuitive level. And it can require a little bit more consciousness, I think, a little bit more effort to get the awareness of how that's working. Let's move on to Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas, another long-term relationship, and another Capricorn moon. In this case, Michael Douglas has a Capricorn moon.
Absolutely. And this couple really have been through quite a lot. And of course, they went through a brief separation and then got back together again. And here's a moon in Pisces, her moon, which is a very different energy, of course, than the moon in Capricorn and the moon in Aries we've just looked at. A very sensitive moon, very emotional moon, who really, I would say, at its core, requires emotional empathy. Very important. And also just to mention that, going back to the elements, that moon in water can find great comfort from being near water and in water. And similarly with the other moons, that a moon in earth, this moon in Capricorn, is likely to find a lot of comfort from being in nature, being on solid ground, being around trees. So that's something useful to keep in mind, because the first thing that's important is how to meet our own lunar needs, of course, because if we can't do that for ourselves, we cannot expect somebody else to do that for us.
And you know, Margaret, we're so used to abstractions. We're so used to thinking about, well, this is what Earth is, you know, water is emotions, and we're so used to moving it to that level so quickly. You're absolutely right. Moon and water, you feel better when you're near water. It's as simple. Moon and fire, light some candles, get a little bit of incense going. Very, very literal. It actually works surprisingly well. People are always surprised to hear that. Moon in Pisces, very, very sensitive, very, very much absorbing the energies of others. Moon in Capricorn, a little bit better about putting up boundaries too. So I think that there's a little bit of a contrast there.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of compatibility between a moon in earth and a moon in water, and I think particularly between Capricorn and Pisces, because actually both of them need time alone, both need private time. The moon in Pisces, as you said, because it's so sensitive, to maybe discharge some of the emotions it's picked up and to separate what are my emotions and what are someone else's, because it's so sensitive. And the moon in Capricorn, because it needs time to process and digest what's, you know, the emotions that it's felt.
Totally. And we could talk, there are some interesting interactions here. For example, Catherine Zeta-Jones's Mars right on Michael Douglas's moon. That's that's an interesting thing. But let's move on to our final chart here, which would be, I put Jacqueline Kennedy on the inside, and I put John F. Kennedy on the outside. And he had a moon in Virgo. Moon in Virgo can be a little reserved in expression of emotions. And her moon, on the other hand, is another moon in Aries.
Absolutely. How interesting. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll be very quick with this. But, you know, moon in Virgo, in my experience, what I've noticed with clients' charts is that sometimes moon in Virgo, feelings can also be felt literally through the body, that it has such a connection with the body. So it's quite a gifted moon in that physical symptoms are often related, so that somebody knows something might be slightly amiss if their body is uncomfortable. I don't know if you've noticed that, but that's just something I've noticed with clients over the years.
You know, that's a really interesting point, and I think Virgo has a little bit of that going on in terms of bodily. You know, it is another. It's a very sensitive. It's a different sort of sensitivity than Pisces, which is across the dial from it. But it is, in fact, very sensitive. And you know, Virgos sometimes with their food, you know, the foods that they'll eat and the things that they don't want near them, and so on. And that's a good point. This is another interesting chart here because again, the woman Mars is right on the man's moon, which is similar to the last thing, and. You know, here we have her moon in Aries, you know, again, that outgoing moon, and his moon in Virgo, which is a little bit less so. So, you know, there is a little bit of a balance. I mean, no, just president of the United States, he's fairly outgoing, but it is a little bit of a difference in terms of what's going on within.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Armanda, I think we've come to the end of our session today. And I very much look forward to talking with you again shortly, in a few weeks, in fact, about in the second part of this series, which will be all about Mercury. So do join us then. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.